Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So the trade market is really heating up considering we had the Mikko Rantanen trade out of nowhere. JT Miller's name is still in reports every single day on top of Elias Pettersson potentially getting traded as well. So I thought it'd only be right for me to update my trade board. I did one in like late November, my way too early trade board. Some of those guys ended up getting traded, but we're going to be updating that. We are going to be doing that top 15. And this is not just who is the most likely players to get traded. That's kind of boring. Like, Cody Ceci is almost a lock to get traded most likely for the San Jose Sharks. Not going to have him top 5 on this just because he's the most likely. It's a blend of who's the most likely as well as who is the best players. Nice little blend of that. Up first, the honorable mentions, Kyle Palmieri. Islanders have been playing better of late. He's a Long Island native, born and raised, so I think he's probably going to stay put, maybe take some kind of team-friendly deal. Cody Ceci's an honorable mention just because of the likelihood. Brandon Tanev's probably going to get traded as well, but more of a depth piece. And then Andrei Kuzmenko, we thought coming into the season after how good he was for Calgary down the stretch that he would be a valuable trade piece. He's kind of playing like shit. He's playing at like a .33 points per game pace. And Calgary's in a playoff spot, probably not going to be selling too much, and he has a sizable cap hit, so I don't have him on this. But up first, at number 15, I got Bowen Byram, who has been a good player for the Buffalo Sabres. Much better than Casey Middlestat this year past the first 2 weeks of the season. But in terms of long-term fit here, I think it is decently possible that he could get traded in the near future before the deadline, considering they do have their two franchise defensemen locked up in Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin, who are both lefties. As a result, Byram has had to play on the right side. He's been effective at it. He's playing 23 minutes a night, has 23 points in 49 games while basically getting like no even power play 2 time. He's been very good for them, but I think considering he's a pending restricted free agent or next year, for him and for the team, it doesn't make sense to give him some kind of long-term deal, and Buffalo's just not going to be willing to give him a deal above $7 million at this point and give those 3 guys massive combined money, almost like $27 million. So I think it might be best for both parties in terms of fit to potentially move off of Bowen Byram. I look at a team like Calgary, maybe get younger Rasmus Anderson to Bowen Byram or something like that. Right side defenseman could make sense. Bowen Byram, not saying it's going to happen in the near future, but it's definitely possible. Dylan Cousins sticking in Buffalo. Dylan Cousins kind of Elias Pettersson swap has obviously been rumored. Dylan Cousins' stock is pretty low. Buffalo was putting him in trade talks earlier this season. I could see a team still betting on Dylan Cousins or buying low on a Dylan Cousins. Yes, he does make $7.1 million, but we saw what this guy did at 21 years old when they were actually a fun team in Buffalo. It's definitely possible that he could potentially return to form and maybe get traded in a big kind of blockbuster for the Buffalo Sabres to shake it up. Next up, I got Seth Jones, and I don't know what to believe with these kind of reports. My hair's all over the place with these reports in terms of teams are kicking the tires on Seth Jones. It's wild. It has to be some kind of salary retention. If a GM is willingly trades for Seth Jones at $9.5 million for 5 seasons after this, they should just straight up get fired unless they have like a first. They're getting a first and a second to take him on. But I think Seth Jones could make sense if they retain $2.5 to $4 million, get him to like a $6 million cap. But I think similarly to Darnell Nurse, he's an overhated player just because he makes that much money. He's not. He's kind of like underrated in a weird way. You know what I'm saying? Like he's just overpaid. He's not a bad player. He could be an effective second pair defenseman for a decent team, and number 3 or number 4 defenseman on a good team, but he just makes too much. So you're going to have to get some serious retention. Chicago still does have a retention spot. They're only retaining on McCabe and Rantanen right now. They didn't retain on Taylor Hall. So yeah, this would be a blockbuster, but I could see maybe a team that is lacking second pair defensemen take a kind of swing on a Seth Jones at $2.75, $3.5 million to get that cap hit into the 6s. Would be very, very creative and interesting for a team to do that. Next up, David Savard. Yes, the Canadians are in the mix, but if a team's willing to offer, because the defenseman market is kind of shallow on expiring guys, if they're willing to offer a second-round pick or even like a mid-third-round pick, I think you probably do that if you're Montreal. I don't think David Savard's going to make or break you in terms of making the playoffs. It's not like he's some high-impact guy. He's playing like 17-30 a night, but a team might be very interested in terms of acquiring him as that third pair defenseman like he was in Tampa Bay that eventually won a Stanley Cup. decent piece. I think Montreal would be wise to move off him for assets. Next up, Brock Nelson. 3 weeks ago, probably would have been top 5 when the Islanders were really struggling. But of course, the Islanders are finding new life. They're going on their resurgence, their heater before the trade deadline, like they do every single year, and just stay mid. They're 7-2 in their last 9 games. Lamoriello went out and made a controversial pickup in Tony DeAngelo, showing that he still thought that this season was not over, that they could salvage it, and they have been playing very good. I think that the Islanders should trade Brock Nelson, but again, the likelihood has decreased a decent amount in the last 3 weeks. They would get a sizable haul. They would get like a first and a third round pick. I look at a team like the Winnipeg Jets, their lack of kind of second line center. If they brought in technically a hometown kid in Brock Nelson, although he's from War Road, Minnesota, that's like the northest part of Minnesota. I think he's closer to Winnipeg than like Minneapolis, St. Paul. But yeah, Brock Nelson going back up to his hometown area would be electric. And just most teams have a second line center deficiency problem. Colorado, unless Nyquist is dominant at center, although he plays mainly in wing for Carolina, maybe they could acquire him in some kind of package. They should trade Brock Nelson, but knowing the New York Islanders, they'll continue this hot streak and end up not trading him and probably buying at the goddamn deadline. Ivan Provorov at number 10. Like Montreal, we didn't expect Columbus to be in the play. Well, we kind of, maybe to a degree, Montreal, we expected them to be somewhat in the mix, but Columbus is a massive shock in terms of being a playoff contender. I thought before the season, damn, they're going to get a sizable haul for Provorov, pencil in a first and a third round pick, because Provorov has been very effective in Columbus ever since he got there. It has been very impressive to see him bounce back. He was kind of forced into like a number 1 role on Philadelphia, just wasn't quite that. But as a number 2 behind Zach Werenski, it has been very, very impressive, him in Columbus. But now Columbus is having this magical season. Do you trade him? Sean Monahan's now at 6 to 8 weeks, so if they falter, maybe Don Waddell is back to trading him. But if they're in a playoff spot come deadline time or like 2 points out, I think that they're probably going to prioritize making the playoffs just for this magical season in honor of Johnny Gaudreau. But I do kind of expect them to also falter a little bit. So it's going to be interesting if they're out of a playoff spot by like 4 to 5 points. I think you got to trade Provorov, because given this market that doesn't really have a true stud expiring defenseman, similarly to like a Noah Hannafin last year, Provorov could get a sizable haul at this year's deadline, although he's maybe not everybody's favorite player. John Gibson. I used an old pick of John Gibson because he's playing like old John Gibson. He's playing like late 2010s John Gibson. I thought before the season there was no way that he could get traded in the middle of the season because he was making $6.4 million, and he had been pretty underwhelming the last 3 years. Yes, he was on a bad team, but he was bad in his own right. He's balling out. .912 save percentage, and the underlying numbers, because the Ducks are just straight up bad team, are even more impressive. He's 6th in the entire NHL in goals saved above expected at 14 goals saved above expected. Dostal's all the way up at 3. So now maybe a team is goalie desperate, and they go out and get a guy like John Gibson. Has 2 years left at this, but considering he's had this resurgence, you can definitely justify him. And maybe if you're Anaheim, although you wouldn't love to retain money on Gibson, considering it's 2 more seasons, if you eat 1.5, that would make him a lot more appetizing to teams at a reasonable 9 or 4.9 or $5.4 million. You look at a team like Carolina, maybe if they don't fully believe in Kochetkov and Anderson is hurt nonstop, they could kind of make a swing, as they did with Mikko Rantanen. Vegas outside the box play would be saying, we don't want to give Adin Hill some kind of like 7x7 with a goaltender. That's probably what you get on the open market. So we're going to swap or do something like that for Gibson, who we have cost controlled at the next 2 seasons instead of a long-term deal that could age really bad, as well as the Edmonton Oilers. Maybe Stuart Skinner goes on another stinky patch and they say, yeah, screw it. We're going for it. We're getting a guy like John Gibson. I know trading in division is always tough, but actually in recent deadlines, we've seen a bunch of trades in division, and it's not like Anaheim's going to be contending with Vegas and Edmonton over the next 3 years, so I don't think that's a major concern. Next up, Ristolainen. Similarly to Provorov, has had a massive rebound in terms of his image and overall play. He has 2 more seasons at $5.1 million, but I think Philadelphia, not as good right now as Montreal or Columbus, and also they're definitely still more so in the rebuilding phase. Although they are a pretty competitive team, they still need definitely some more assets. They do have 3 first-round picks. Imagine if they had 4 first-round picks this year. But yeah, Ristolainen, $5.1 million. I think if teams had cap space, whether that's from LTIR money that opens up or accruing cap space across the season, Risto is a really intriguing player to potentially pick up as that physical two-way, more so defensive defenseman, second pair guy that can play decent minutes if he has to. Don't get me wrong, he was not a number 1 in Buffalo, but as your number 4 defenseman, I think similarly to a Seth Jones, he can be very, very effective. And he's going to be an unrestricted free agent in 2 seasons at 32 years old. So I don't think that he's a serious part of Philadelphia's future. They have young guys like Drysdale, York, and Oliver Bonk coming over next season, most likely. And they already have veterans like Sanheim. Sanheim is actually not that old, but he's a veteran. He's like on year 8. And as well as Nick Seeler that they re-signed. So Ristolainen is kind of expendable. And it wouldn't surprise me if a team makes a serious push for Ristolainen at this year's deadline. Trent Frederic. When looking at him, he has really not played that good for the Boston Bruins this year. 7 goals, 7 assists in 49 games. After a breakout season last year with 18 goals, 22 assists, 40 points, gives you 200 plus hits. I almost just said assists per season. He's a physical monster. I think GMs would still like a guy like that in their lineup. So if Boston can make some kind of desperation move in terms of attaching assets to him to get a better player, or just if they're out of a playoff spot come deadline time, trading Frederic away for a 2nd-round pick and prioritizing more so the future, I do not think that this management group and just the ownership is too keen on giving this guy an extension, considering he's been so lackluster this season. Elias Pettersson, number 6. I still think JT Miller is more likely to get traded. We're going to get to him later, but it's possible, especially now that there's rumors about him in Buffalo. Buffalo has made a serious push for Petrson. It would be tough to trade that contract midseason, but I think if you could attach a Dylan Cousins going the other way, it makes the money work a lot easier. And I think teams, especially teams that lack potential offensive superstar power. Granlund, number 5. When looking at Granlund, I don't think it's as likely that they trade him compared to maybe a month or 2 ago, because he has been such an effective mentor for this team. But still, he only makes $5 million this season. The San Jose Sharks don't have a retention spot, but they can get a 3rd team to retain, and they probably get a 1st-round pick. He has 103 points in 119 games in San Jose. Jesus Christ, what the hell is going on in this video? But yeah, he's been a very, very good player in San Jose, a very good leader. Will be interesting to see if they trade him. Probably will get a late 1st-round pick for trading him, and I understand 1,000% if Mike Greer instead opts for the future assets. Gustav Nyquist, after a 75-point season when the Predators made the playoffs, you expected him to be a massive piece of a playoff team in Nashville. They've obviously shat the bed. They're 12 points out of a playoff spot right now as we speak, and Nyquist has not been good. The underlying numbers have actually been better than last year when he had 75 points, but he's going at under half a point per game right now, 20 points in 47 games. I still think a team would probably give up a 2nd-round pick just because the market is pretty shallow in terms of forwards, and him at half retained is only just under $1.6 million. So if you're Nashville, you got to trade him. He's 33, 34 years old. They're going to sign him to some kind of extension after this. Trade the guy, pick up a 2nd-round pick. They already have they have 3 1st-round picks this year. Just continue to accrue assets for this retool and probably eventually a heavy rebuild. Get Nyquist off the team, and there's going to be a lot of takers. Don't get me wrong. Yanni Gord, number 3. Last year, Seattle had Alex Wenberg. This year, they're probably trading Yanni Gord. Right now, they're 8 points back of the wild card, 8 points back of Calgary, and Calgary has 2 games in hand on them, so the season is basically over for the Seattle Kraken. They got to prioritize the future. And Gord, although maybe doesn't have the offense that he's had in prior years, had back-to-back 48 points, then last year kind of fell off, and this year, yet again, on pace for like around 35-ish, still is that playoff-proven 3rd-line center, 2-way guy, more so defensive, that most teams would line up and give a 2nd and a 4th-round pick. Basically the exact same price that they got for Alex Wenberg. I would expect Yanni Gord to get at half retained. Number 2, Marcus Petrson. In my opinion, he is the top expiring defenseman, and especially considering the fact that Pittsburgh is out of the playoffs, most likely. They're 8 points back of the Bruins for the final wild card as of right now. They're probably missing, and they definitely need to prioritize the future. If you weren't willing to re-sign Jake Gensel, trade Marcus Pettersson. He's only 28, 29 years old. A team would give up a lot. They'd probably trade for, similarly to Hanifin, trade for Pettersson, then lock him up immediately. This is a guy that has played 22, 23 minutes a night the last 2 years, gets no power play time, but has posted like back-to-back or on pace to post back-to-back 30-point even strength seasons. He's a very underrated player, and I think on a team as a number 3 defenseman on a playoff team, he would finally start to get the respect that he deserves. And if you're Pittsburgh, again, you're not making it this season. You're probably not making it the following season. I know you want to have one last run with Sidney Crosby, but you got to prioritize future assets, and I think Kyle Dubas will admit that. If he's willing to trade Erik Karlsson, apparently he's going to trade Marcus Pettersson at this year's deadline. And then lastly, No surprise here. JT Miller, in terms of a good player, 103 points last year. In his down year this season, he has 33 points in 38 games, and he's the talk of the trade down. One minute he's going to New York for Hedel, Lindgren, and a first-round pick. The next minute he's going to Carolina for Martin Necas. Now, I don't even know. I think he's going to New York again or something like that. Every day for the past week, it's been like, oh, the trade was about to happen, and then it doesn't happen. I still think that he does get traded, although now a week ago, it'd probably be like 95% that Miller gets traded, 5% that it's Pettersson. It's maybe switched to like 80-20, but I still think Miller, considering he's 32, 33 years old, has 5 more years at $8 million after this. Pettersson is in his prime and has shown that he can be a 100-point two-way monster, that you keep Pettersson and try to rehab him and get rid of JT Miller, who's maybe not beloved in the locker room. And yeah, get rid of JT Miller. Make it happen soon. Stop. They're drawing this out at this point, man. We got a Mikko Rantanen trade out of nowhere on a Friday night. Meanwhile, Miller has been almost traded 37 times in the past week and a half. Just get it done. They're moving so slow. They always draw things out in Vancouver with the Bruce Boudreau firing and now this. Freaking get it done. Let's go through the top 15 again. We got Bowen Byram, Cousins, Jones, Savard, Nelson, Provorov, Gibson, Ristolainen, Frederic, Pettersson, Granlund, Nyquist, Gord. I almost said Gordie Howe, Pettersson, and Miller. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about this? I'll be seeing the next one. Peace.